Happy New Year, everyone. And excited, got a good one today with Vasu, Courtside VC. You definitely probably know his background, so don't want to go too much into that. But Vasu, anyway, appreciate you hopping on, and
Of course.
we'll have to get on the court soon too.
Yes, 100%. Bring those
We
sneakers when you come to New York.
we do enough of these Zooms and video calls, so it's always good to be on the court. I know you guys have some good runs going over there.
Absolutely. That's the one reason to live in New York City is the best pickup in the world.
Okay, yeah, it is good. I had a conversation with someone about this, and they were saying LA, so we got New York.
Really
Yeah.
interesting. Okay.
Anyway, we'll figure that out some other time. But so you're a bunch of announcements recently. Michael Jordan invested in your fourth fund. You're doing this stuff, and are you excited? Generally, just like curious about this myself. Like as you've built this out, you're on a fourth fund now. You've gone through the whole gauntlet. You know what it all looks like. You still as excited about sports and venture and everything as when you started?
I think so. I mean, I would say I was an entrepreneur at heart always. And a lot of people ask me, how did you end up in venture? And I always tell them, I kind of landed ass backwards into this thing. I never thought I was going to be a VC, to be honest with you. When I sold my last business, I assumed I would end up just starting another company. And it just so happened that because of Dan Gilbert, who I had a very good relationship with, and we had done a lot of deals that I had sent him over the years, and he kind of backed us and put us in business in the venture space. But I was still running my company when we first launched Courtside. And so it was sort of this side project, if you will, in some ways that had just come about because of our relationship. And we sold the business, and the very next, I was like, great, like at least I have something to do now. And it was Courtside, it was investing. And now here we are almost a decade later. We just finished our 9th year, 4 funds. And to me, it's the closest thing that allows me to be an entrepreneur without necessarily being an entrepreneur and having the weight of the world on your shoulders, which is what you have. If you're a founder, every day is, are we going to make it the next 3 months, 6 months, 9 months? And you sort of don't have that pressure as a VC. You do have plenty of other pressures. You still have to fundraise. We're still technically running a business. You got to hire good people. You got to make sure that they're motivated to stick around. A lot of nuances within the venture world that people think investors are just investors. They're not running a business, but we're running a business here. And so for me, it's allowed me to be an entrepreneur. It allows me to kind of get my feet wet and dig my fingers in every so often into a lot of businesses, but I'm not the person that has to build them. And I think that that's great. And so for me, it's been an awesome near decade here. I'm about as excited as I've ever been about things, partially because, the more you've been in this business, the more people trust you, the more you're able to raise bigger and bigger funds. And not that we want to keep doubling in size. 100 million we've found is the right size for the strategy that we have in early stage venture. But it's allowed us to meet so many great LPs. It's allowed us to meet so many great founders. And we're at the point now where, because we, to some extent, had first mover advantage being the first sports fund back in 2016, I'd say just about every founder who's building something within sports comes past our desk. We get to have a conversation with them. And of course, you can't do every deal in venture, as you know, but just being able to have those conversations and hear what people are doing, it keeps me excited. And so as someone who gets bored easily, I like that venture keeps you on your toes and that every day you're hearing something new.
It's funny you say that because I say that a lot too. The getting bored easily. That's why school wasn't always great for me. You had brought up a few things in there about, you're running a business yourself as a VC and founder, especially over the last couple of years. It feels like, at least on X, I don't know about some of the other platforms, but there's been a big shitstorm to VCs and just down talking on whatever. Any misconceptions or things that, having been on the founder side and then obviously now the VC side, that founders have about venture firms and maybe particularly even you, or things you guys have heard?
Yeah, I think it's always important for founders to understand the economics of venture first, right? If they understand that, then I think that they would understand why it might take us a long time to get back to you, why we say no a lot of times, even when seemingly they may have something great. I always use the example of, for us as a $100 million fund now, on average, we own 10% of these businesses. We're probably going to get diluted down to probably 7.5% to 5% by the time it's all said and done. And of the 30 deals that we do out of each fund, we've probably ended up looking at somewhere north of 6,000 to 8,000 companies to pick those 30. And we're still going to be wrong 85% of the time. It's really 3 companies per fund that end up bringing in the 3x returns, which means you got to believe that every one of these companies is going to return $100 million. And if you're going to own, even let's for easy math, let's say we actually do own 10% of these businesses at exit, it means it's got to be $1 billion outcome for us, for our 10% to be worth $100 million. And I think that if a founder understands those economics and then understands that fundraising for us is probably 10 times harder than it is fundraising for them, because they just have to raise a couple $1,000,000 in their business. We can't raise just a couple $1,000,000. We literally have to raise damn near close to $100 million each time. Otherwise, people are going to say, something must be wrong. You can't raise $100 million for your subsequent fund. Things must be going pretty poorly over there. And so it's not one of these things where you can just cobble together a little bit of money and you're in business. You got to raise the amount of money you set out to raise. And LPs have not had distributions from most funds for quite a while now. It's been 2-3 years since the market started to turn. So there's been no liquidity. And, unlike founders who every time are going to a new venture fund to raise capital, a lot of venture funds, for the most part, are raising from the same set of LPs. They may add a couple people here and there, but you're going back to the same well over and over and over again. So imagine going back to that same person without having given them any money back for the last 5-7 years. And that too, not just from your fund, but from the 20 other funds that they've invested in. It's a tough business. It's a really tough business to do venture right and to win in it. And by the way, it's a 10-year fund cycle. When you're a seed stage investor like we are, you don't even know if you're good at your job for 10 years almost, right? On paper, you might be, but until you've actually returned capital to LPs, you're nobody. And so when you put all of those things together, man, it's a rough business. It looks like it's a real rosy, cushy business where we're just, we're flying around and we're staying in nice hotels and we're attending conferences, but good God, it's a grind. And I love that grind. For me, it's energizing to wake up and meet a new company and try to convince my partners that this is a deal that we should do, while they're giving me 20 reasons why we shouldn't. And I'm pounding the table. Like there's something interesting about that whole thing that for me has been great. And I think I speak for my partners when I say we truly enjoy what we do. And if you ask me if I've worked a day in my life the last 16 years since I graduated from college, I would say I absolutely don't feel like I ever have, even when times have been tough. It's a business that I love. And so I felt like I'm doing something that's interesting every day. But man, VCs we're trying to, stay afloat just like every one of these founders are, and make it to the next fund because we've been able to generate return from the first one. It's a little less painful than perhaps they have it, because once we've raised the money, we're on a 10-year cycle. And so you sort of know, well, at least your salary is taken care of and you're going to be in business for some period of time. But outside of that, it's just as rough of a business in many ways as being a founder. And I think it would be good if founders realize that, because then they'd have some little bit of empathy for why, when we're looking at 5,000 deals a year and we got to pick 30 of them, why we said no to them.
Yeah, and sitting on both sides of the table from a fundraising perspective, any things you've learned or picked up on the way yourself, like when you see so many and hear so many, but then you also have to do it yourself. I think you sit in a unique position.
Yeah.
What do you believe are sort of the best strategies, for, we'll keep it to founders to go and execute? Because I think that's where VCs have huge advantages. They actually really know how to raise capital because they see so many that they can start to pick what are the best strategies. Right. And then take it and then relay it back.
It's a lot of pattern recognition for us, right? When you look at as many deals as we do within such a narrow vertical, we can pretty quickly tell when we look at a deck, we look at an email, the way it's written, you can tell for the most part if this is a founder that cares about the little things. And I think it's really important. You have to have big picture vision, but you also have to care about the little things as a founder if you're going to build great product. And again, as a tech company, as a tech fund, we do care about the quality of product and things like that. There's two things that matter more than anything else in venture, to us at least. It's the size of the market and it's the quality of founders. Because especially when you're investing at the seed stage, so many things can change over the lifetime of that company that you just have to believe that the people are capable of changing with the times and pivoting when they need to. And if you're a generalist VC, you may not have as good of a view on every market. And so when a deal comes in, with great founders, you've got to spend the time to think about whether or not that market opportunity is big enough. Whereas for us, I think the benefit that we have and why we can look at so many deals with such a small team is that we know our industries inside and out. And for the most part, we know where there's white space. We know what markets are too small as an opportunity. And as a result, like no matter how good the founder is and no matter how great that product might be, if the market's too small, the market's too small. There's very few cases of people actually expanding markets. It happens every now and then. Uber is probably a great example. I truly think they expanded the size of like the black car market by building a great product. But for the most part, companies go after markets that are pre-existing in size. If they're not big enough, then you just can't build a big enough business to return the capital we need. I tell founders all the time, doesn't mean this isn't a great business for you as a founder and you can build a great lifestyle business and have a $20 million exit. It'll change your life. Do it. Just don't raise venture capital money for it because you're going to screw yourself. And for us, we have to be able to very quickly look at a deal and say, okay, at least we know the market size is there. Now, is this the right set of founders? And for me, that probably all comes down to storytelling. I think both fundraising for us as VCs is a lot of storytelling. It's the same thing. The best founders who've been able to raise the most amount of money out there are founders that have the ability to tell a great story, but then can also go execute. And too often you see guys who can execute but have no charisma. And I think those people are great COOs, but they're probably not great CEOs. And then you've got the guys that are great storytellers, but they can't execute or do anything behind the scenes. And, that's a lot of smoke and mirrors. And it's rare to find that perfect breed of founder that has both the ability to allure you with a great story, but then can turn around and back it up by actually executing. And again, if you can find those guys and girls, you hopefully have $1 billion company on your hands.
Yeah. Do you lean more people or do you lean more like market?
It's both. I honestly don't think you can go one or the other. You have to lean people after you've validated the market, right? And so oftentimes, even if the market is there, it's not the right people, then we won't do the deal. So I suppose in some ways, to answer your question, I'd say we're leaning people, but only after we're certain that the market size is there. We won't just lean people and say, well, figure it out. We already know that there's no market here, but you seem like a great person. Nah, we can't do that deal. That's just not doing right by your LPs at that point.
Yeah, and then from you started in sports, and then you've obviously gone into collectibles and gaming and lifestyle. And I know you sort of can bucket it, but there's a lot that does fit into those verticals. How do you guys sort of position yourself or see yourself now? Because you might still have the sports sort of verbiage, and it's definitely like a vertical you're looking at in Courtside VC, the name, but it seems like a lot of your deals are sort of around the peripheral of it. So you must have had some learnings along the way there too.
Yeah, I mean, the first thing that we did when we launched this fund was really try to define what the word sports actually meant. And it meant something very different, I think, to the VC community before we came around. And we said sports is so much more than teams and leagues and athletes. Like there's a whole world out there that touches sports in so many ways. And that's where we want to invest in. And also, so part of that was needing to have a broad enough funnel that we could do what we do, because if you're just investing into leagues and teams and products sold to those leagues and teams, one, I don't think most of those businesses are big enough. Two, historically, leagues and teams have not operated on a venture timeline. It takes decades to build something big. And that's changing. And we can talk about that a little bit with things that we're looking at now. But we, for the first 3 funds, have never touched a league or a team for that very reason. We just didn't think we could get to returns fast enough. And so we partly needed more things that we could invest in. We also needed things where the market was big enough to generate venture returns. And you look at media. We were lucky enough to be in The Athletic first money in back in 2016, and they had a great outcome. They returned our whole fund for us, but they returned our whole fund when we were a $35 million fund. If we had invested in that business out of a $100 million fund, even being the best media outcome ever in sports, it wouldn't have returned our entire fund, right? And since The Athletic, there's really been nothing else that has come close to being of that scale. And so we had to go out and find places where we thought there was alpha. It was sort of non-consensus. Where do other people not want to look or touch things, but we think that there's enough money to be made? And sports betting and fantasy was one of those places early on that we got in pretty early, not just domestically, but internationally. We went to places like Brazil, which had not yet legalized sports betting, and placed an early bet on fantasy there, expecting that we would eventually see Brazil legalize sports betting, which they did this year. And, one of our companies there just got a sportsbook license, and hopefully they'll be a major player in the Brazilian market. We looked at India. India is a tough place to do business. A lot of people don't want to touch India, but we looked at India as, shit, you've got 600 million smartphone users, the cheapest data in the world. 400 million of those 600 million people play games on their phone every month because it's the cheapest form of entertainment. In a country like India with 1.5 billion people, many of whom live just barely above the poverty line, ultimately everybody still needs entertainment in their lives. And the cheapest form of that is mobile gaming now. And so we've spent a lot of time in India looking at mobile apps and games there because we believe it's sort of the next frontier of entertainment at a mass scale. So today, if you ask us, we say we're a sports, gaming, and collectibles fund in many ways. And sports touches a lot of things, including fitness and wellness and recovery and all of those things, along with sports betting and media. Gaming encompasses literally anything that is mobile gaming and or real money gaming. And then within the world of collectibles, we've sort of had this thesis for a while that eBay had been the place for the first 20 years of the internet where all collectibles were bought and sold. And as the value of these items has risen to the point where they've become a real asset class, we needed better buyer and seller tools. You need vertically focused marketplaces. You need insurance, shipping and logistics, liquidity. There's a whole ecosystem around this $600 billion a year industry that for the longest time had just been seen as a cottage industry of hobbyists. And now it's a real place. It's a place to put money to work. The rich, you see it as a store of wealth. They may see it as a hedge against inflation. And so for us, that's become a really interesting place where we've started to put a lot of money. Oh, I think you're on mute. I've lost audio.
Blockchain crypto. Anything in that world over the last few years? I know there was, or what are your thoughts even on that space?
Well, the last 2 years, I've told a lot of founders, take the word crypto or Web3 out of your deck, otherwise you're not going to be able to raise a single dollar, right? It's been a rough go for those guys. I think with regulation probably changing over the next couple of years with the new incoming administration, I think the crypto guys are going to have a fun time. We are not a crypto fund. Anytime we did a Web3 deal over the course of 21, 22, when things were at their peak, it was always from the lens of collectibles. So it was, is someone building a platform? We did a soccer team that was using crypto to kind of fundraise and allow fans to have ownership within the team. Didn't go very well. Crypto kind of collapsed in the midst of that. But we always looked at crypto and Web3 through the lens of what are we doing? So it's sports, gaming, collectibles. Okay, a team that is using tokens and crypto in some way. We did a couple of blockchain-based games that are still alive and doing well. Hopefully they'll have a little bit of a comeback here over the next couple of years because none of them kind of had escape velocity. And then within the collectibles world, we obviously saw a number of NFT-based platforms. Pretty much all of them went to zero over the course of the last 2 years. And so we always say, like, the biggest mistake that we can make is say, well, we looked at something, it didn't work a couple of years ago, so we shouldn't touch it now. It's easy to get jaded in venture when you have one bad deal. And I think it's incumbent upon us to keep reminding ourselves that times change, markets change, regulation can change. And especially as a fund that we love regulation. Like, we go into regulated markets all the time because a lot of VCs don't want to touch them, but we feel like that's your moat. If you're able to figure out regulation and legislation, it'll be so much harder for someone else to come beat you down the road. And so we've seen this occur again. Brazil is an example, India is an example, and as well as here in the US, where oftentimes you have state by state regulation. For us, we love those types of businesses. And so I see no difference with crypto and Web3. Like, we will never do a pure crypto deal, but if there's something within our three verticals that makes sense, we'll definitely take a look at it.
Very cool. And I did, so just before we hopped on, I just put like your whole portfolio through AI. and just
Oh,
see like what's the, I can send it to you after, whatever, but super interesting. Like the main takeaway, and there was a handful, but like the main one was consumer, like very consumer.
yep.
And as you tie it back to what you've been saying earlier, like looking for these big outcomes, do you believe that is a key central piece to what you guys are trying to do and what you're looking for is the consumer lens?
Yes, I think, I mean, it's not that we've never done an enterprise company. We've done a couple, but when you look at our verticals, for the most part, the biggest outcomes that we've seen have all been businesses that have been able to go after mass consumer. And as an overarching thesis to our fund, we always talk about, you know, where is the next generation spending time and share of wallet? And we look at these three verticals of sports, gaming, and collectibles as very much passion economies. These are things that people will spend irrational amount of time and money on because there's this love that they have for all of these things. I always joke, I'm not the most outgoing person. I don't go out, I don't drink, I don't party. So making friends after college is really difficult. And so if you look at where have I met every single person that I call a friend today after college, it's been somebody I met on the basketball court playing pickup with, or it's been somebody I've met through the collecting communities of a bunch of things that I collect. And we've got such active chat groups. I mean, every couple of weeks I'm added to a new WhatsApp group, and then all of a sudden you meet thousands of new people are in these groups and they're so active. And so I'm at the point where I could literally go to any country in the world and I post one message either on a chat group or on Instagram saying, hey, I'm here. And there will be 20 guys from these collecting communities who will hit me up. They'll say, yo, let us take you out. Let's show you our city and take you out to dinner. And that's so rare to be in a position to just go anywhere in the world and people are willing to hang out with you. And it's because there's this common thread of either sports or collectibles. For me, for many other people, it's gaming. I know so many kids these days who make friends because they start gaming with someone and then they meet up in real life because they met them on a video game. So the world is changing dramatically, and all of this is happening from a consumer lens. And so we've done a couple of enterprise level companies, but like 90% of what we see, or 95%, quite frankly, are almost always consumer companies. And so it's almost just happened that way. It's not like we set out to be a consumer fund. It's just the biggest deals are all consumer companies. And if you look at our biggest outcomes, StockX, The Athletic, 100 Thieves, all of these are consumer companies.
Makes sense. Yeah, I mean, it can go to the most people. I want to come back to, you talked about the teams and the leagues. Obviously, it seems like you did the one. You tested out a little bit, but it was a little bit different on the crypto side a little bit. You say the timelines are shrinking. What are you seeing in that space? Like, what are you really looking for, looking at? Obviously, we've had, I don't know, we've had probably 20 emerging league sport guests
Yep.
on our podcast alone. So I'll leave it at that. But I'm really curious as you start to evaluate that space.
Yeah, we always say, funny enough, PLL, the professional lacrosse league, was incubated out of the Courtside office back in 2016, 2017. We gave those guys free office space. They were awesome, and we never invested, which was the irony of the whole thing. We literally had them sitting next door to, and they've done a great job. I don't know whether it would have generated venture scale returns for us, but one of the few major success stories, I think, within an emerging league for a sport like lacrosse. But at the time, again, we literally just didn't believe that you could build something fast enough within a 7 to 8 year time frame to have a 10-year exit. Today, what we're and a big part of that was just, well, when you historically looked at how long it took to get to the point where a major media company or broadcaster would come to you and give you a media rights deal, and then you start to generate real revenue, but your first deal is probably going to be tiny, and they'll say, look, it'll be in-kind services, we won't give you any money, but ESPN will send a crew down and we'll put you on TV. Like, it just took too long. But now what you're seeing is, the rise of things like Baller League, which is a deal that we recently did. Those guys were really smart. They've changed the format of an existing sport, which is the most watched sport in the world. They cut it down from 90-minute halves to 2 15-minute halves, 6-on-6 soccer. You can't kick the ball backwards behind midfield, so there's none of this just putting around and hanging out. And so it's constant action. And then probably the smartest thing they did, right, is that they brought in influencers and content creators that already have an audience of 10, 20, 30 million people on Instagram, X, where have you. and gave them each a team. So then you got 8 teams, each run by someone that is already a known entity that has an audience. So when they launched in Germany on Twitch, where now again, new type of league, you're not waiting for an existing broadcaster to come to you. You're just going, listen, we're going to go on Twitch. We're going to put our games up there. And because of who we have involved, the audience will come. At least that was their thesis. But they were right. On day one, they became the most watched channel in Germany in their first season this past year, right? And that brings sponsorship dollars in a major way in right off the bat. Versus again, I looked at so many leagues over the last 10 years, and it would take 3, 4, 5 years for them to get to the point where Baller League has gotten to in just their first year, and that's just in Germany. And now they want to launch a UK league, a US league. So we look at a business like that. We look at how fast the revenue is growing, how they don't have to wait for viewership and audience to sort of be created, and we say, okay, that's the business that we think can get to an exit in 10 years, or at least an exit where we can exit our shares to in a secondary transaction somewhere. It can get big enough. So now we're starting to get a little more excited about that. Teams are still a little bit more difficult, I think, for VC. I don't necessarily think that those are great VC businesses. However, they're clearly PE businesses, as we've seen over the last year to 2 years, how many funds are now being set up specifically to buy stakes in teams. So I think those are great X5X PE businesses, whereas some of these emerging leagues, I think, can be great VC businesses now.
Yeah. And do you, like, from liquidity standpoint, I know you mentioned secondaries. Do you, like, from a capital, I don't want to bring up any specific leagues, but we've seen some as they start out, their first round is 30 million of raised capital. Does that worry you at all from being a seed stage investor of like just the capital intensity and like too much upfront from like their seed rounds?
Absolutely. I mean, we have to take that very seriously. At the end of the day, we still have to think about a league no differently than any other company, right? You have to ask yourself, based on how much we're able to write, which for us, like the biggest check we could possibly ever write is $5 million. And that would be really stretching it if we wrote a $5 million check. We've never done it before, right? But let's just say we were able to put $5 million in. Okay, what is the effective valuation on this deal? How much can we own of it? And how can we underwrite that in 10 years to once again get us back to a $100 million outcome? And if we can't do that, the deal doesn't make any sense for us. It doesn't matter how great the opportunity is, we just can't do the deal. And so again, historically, that has been one of the reasons why we haven't done leagues, because it felt like they had to raise too much money to get up and running. And so we have to structure these things differently sometimes. We got to be like, look, we can come in, we can do sort of like a pre-seed round with you guys, get enough ownership where even after dilution, when you raise the big chunks of money, we still feel like we can have ownership. We have to start to get creative if we're going to do these things. Otherwise, you're absolutely right. It takes a lot of money to get a league up and running these days.
Yeah, a little bit of financial engineering. Now, how do you, you've gone now to your fourth fund. It seems like you've sort of, and I don't mean like, I don't want to say you've peaked, but like you've peaked in where you found your sweet spot. But I imagine internally, or at least you yourself, you're thinking, okay, what's next? If this is the sweet spot for this kind of vehicle, is it new vehicles, new verticals, new internally at Courtside? How do you think about your next evolution or your next, scaling per se into new markets or vehicles or whatever it is?
Yeah, when I sold my company Krossover, we sold it to private equity, and as much as private equity rips your face off and it's a miserable experience, the one thing that I was hopeful was that Krossover would live on because it was owned by private equity, and that means they want to keep running the business, and that 20 years from now, 30 years from now, I'd be able to tell kids that were playing high school basketball, that piece of software you're using today, I built that 30, 40 years ago. And unfortunately, they ended up selling our business to our biggest competitor, who ended up taking all of our customers, putting them onto their platform, and they killed the company entirely. It no longer exists, unfortunately. And that really hurt. Like the thing that I really regret is the fact that we built this awesome product that so many millions of kids used, and it no longer exists. And in many ways, like there's nothing to point to from a legacy standpoint of something I built. And my hope is that Courtside can outlive all of us, and that there's a next generation of finance people and VCs that we can hand this firm off to in 20 years' time. And I believe that sports has withstood the test of time. It was here 100 years before me. It'll be 100 years after I'm gone. Collectibles, I think, have withstood the test of time. And something tells me gaming will be around as well. And so like we're investing in these things that are not flash in the pans. They're things that we truly believe in and that they will be around for all of mankind. And if they will be, then we'd like to build something that lasts beyond us. And that may be not just an early stage venture fund, because I always said, well, I've done the whole manage 100 people thing, and you eventually become a babysitter. And I love doing deals. I don't ever want to just be managing a company and people. I still want to be able to do deals. But the more we've thought about how do you build something bigger, the more we've started to realize that it may have to be that there's multiple vehicles here beyond early stage venture. That could mean growth. That could mean private credit opportunities within the sports and gaming worlds. It could be a collectibles fund. No one's done that before. So there's all these different financial instruments that we've been thinking about. Like, how can we leverage what we've learned over the last decade of making early stage investments, all the data that we've collected, and in many ways, opportunities that perhaps our own companies need or our LPs need because we've seen what they invest in and where there's white space, trying to come up with other things that we can do beyond just early stage, and the things that we've talked about. We haven't actually gone through and done any of them. Most people still see us as an emerging manager, right? We're still only on fund 4. We've returned real money in fund 1, but that's it. Fund 2 is only 5 years old. Fund 3 is only 3 years old or 2 years old, really. So we haven't, in some ways, everyone could look at us and go, well, you guys got lucky in fund 1. Yeah, you did well, but you only did it once. Do it again. Prove to us that you can do it again, and you can do it again before you go do all these other things. And so for us, it's always this balance of, okay, like, yeah, everyone sees us as being successful, but we've really only been successful one time so far. The rest of it's still paper gains, and we need to give people money back before they believe in us. But we also have so many other ideas. Like I said, get bored easily, and you're an entrepreneur at heart. You always want to build more and more things. And I feel like we've had a lot of those conversations internally. Maybe 2025 will be the year. We'll see.
Very cool. So what's exciting you in 2025? Where's a lot of your attention, at least on the deal side of some areas? And I know you mentioned a bunch of them, but like, what's at least like a few pinpoints where you're like, hey, I'm really excited about this. Could be a company, an area, vertical, past companies, recent investments, whatever it is.
Yeah, I went from being the sports guy to being the collectibles guy over the last 3 years. So almost all of my time now is collectibles. So I'm always thinking about them, both personally with my own money. It's crazy how much of my mind share is taken up by them. But as a result, always seeing opportunities within venture. And, one of the things that we talked about a lot is, what does the next generation of auction houses look like? The Christie's, Sotheby's, Phillips of the world. They're asset heavy entities. They have thousands of employees. They have real estate in every major city in the world. And the whole auction experience of showing up to a room and holding up a paddle for an evening sale, it's not really what our generation is into, especially as most bids now, I think over 60% are probably coming online. Probably 40% of them are sort of Gen Z and the next generation of collector. Like, what does the auction house of the future look like? That's something we're spending a lot of time on. Liquidity is something that liquidity is sort of like, the name of the game right now, regardless of whether you're a founder, whether you're a VC, whether you're an LP, like everyone's talking about liquidity. And I always think about liquidity from the standpoint of collectibles. If you're a extremely wealthy individual, a billionaire, let's call it, and you are banking with Goldman Sachs and you've got $1 billion in art, you can go to Goldman Sachs and say, hey, listen, I want to take out a $200 million line against my artwork. And they'll say, sure, sir, we know everything you own. We know that these are blue chip paintings. Here's a $200 million line of credit at 5%, 6% interest. If Vasu, who's not a billionaire, goes into Bank of America, where I have my bank accounts, and I tell them, hey guys, like, I've got $5 million in all these awesome collectibles, and I'd like to take out a $500,000 loan. They're like, who are you? And what are these collectibles? You're out of your mind. Like, there's no way we can lend you money against these things, right? But that's where the world's going. Like, I can't tell you how many kids have built businesses on the back of StockX and other platforms where they buy and hold inventory and flip them. And they're sitting on hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars of items that have real value, but a traditional financial institution do not understand what those assets are. And so they would never lend you money against them. And I think there's a huge opportunity here for someone to sort of build like a neobank with collectibles at its focus to allow people to have liquidity against their items without having to sell them. And so, again, I'm talking to a lot of founders. No one's really cracked it yet. I talked to some people in crypto that were trying to do it. But at some point, this problem needs to be solved, because you're literally talking about near $1 trillion industry in collectibles that has no sort of native banking solutions for it.
Yeah, I'm probably only growing just with the dollar continuing to decrease. Like people are, I mean, we already see it with Bitcoin and everything else. Like people want these other assets. So yeah. And
Absolutely.
speaking to one of my roommates, and he was one of our walk-ons, but he paid for most of his college just literally buying and flipping stuff. He was always getting had the bots. He'd go buy 10 new of the Jordans, sell 8 of
Love it.
them. Yeah, so it is interesting space. Yeah, other than that, Vasu, what are good places just to stay up from whoever you are, whether you're a founder, other investor, whatever you are, to keep up with Courtside? Is it just your website?
Website, we're on Twitter. You can follow me, you can follow Courtside. But yeah, if you're building anything in the space, shoot us an email. I promise you we look at every single one of them. And going back to just, we're a 5-person team and we probably see 5,000 to 6,000 deals. We can't respond to every single one of them, but I promise you we read every one of them. There is not a single email that comes in that we do not read. And
what's the best way to at least increase those chances of getting on a call or getting a response from your opinion?
You got to be working on something big enough that we believe that you can return $100 million to us with our 10% stake, right? If it's not big enough, then it's just unfortunately not big enough. And oftentimes, whenever possible, if we see something really compelling but we know it's not big enough, we do still try to respond and let founders know, look, like, we think you're onto something here. You should pursue this because we really do believe there's white space. We just don't think it's big enough for us. So either don't raise money or go to a smaller firm or go raise angel money and build this thing because we truly do believe in it. We just can't make the economics work for us, unfortunately. And I'm a former founder and someone who still considers myself a founder at heart. Like, I really want to tell those founders as often as I can to not give up, but keep going because there really is something here. We're not just saying it to be nice. Like, I will be very candid with people when I think there's nothing there. And I'll give them the 10 reasons why I've seen 100 of these companies over the last 10 years and none of them have made it. I'm like, look, maybe you're the diamond in the rough that cracks it, but the odds are stacked against you, man. So, let me try to save you 10 years of heartache, maybe do something else. But the ones where we think there's something there, we try to push them even if we can't give them money.
Yeah, and I think one of the things is often people just don't know where to go raise. Founders particularly don't know family office or VC or Excel. Like, there's a big education gap. So yeah, it's appreciated for you guys pushing that one.
Absolutely.
Awesome. I love it. Well, good stuff, Vasu.
Awesome, man.